Welcome to Laughter for All. It's the podcast with Comedian Nazareth.
Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Laughter for All podcast. I am Comedian Nazareth, and welcome to episode number 185 here in, we don't know what kind of weather, California. So it's so good to be with you guys again. Thank you for being consistent. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for watching. And as you know, every week we get you someone, an expert in a certain arena that can really encourage you, lift you up, share their testimony, and then also tell you about what they do and learn. We can learn about what they do and very it's really encouraging to me. I'm excited to learn, and I hope you are the same way too. Okay, this week, what's going on? This last week, I was in Tennessee. I went to Tennessee. I flew in on Thursday, and then on Friday night, I did a gala for an organization called Jonah's Joy. And what they do, they help young girls who are having challenges, problems, anxiety, depression, don't have the right parenting at home, they're rebellious. They try to help them, they counsel them, and also right now they use horses to really to be part of the healing process and comforting them. It's just a great ministry. We had over 700 people. It was wonderful. It was in Crossville. Well, I stayed, people. This is funny. I've never done. I always stay in a hotel. The only two times I did not stay in a hotel. The first time, this guy insisted in Florida that I stay in his house. I said, I don't stay at homes. I stay at hotels. He goes, try my house and then you do it. Well, I went to his house. My room had a bowling alley in it. This guy happened to own Nationwide Insurance, not just one branch, the entire Nationwide company. So it was a huge home. My quarters were like bigger than any home I've been in. So that was the first time. The second time was last Thursday and Friday. I stayed in a stable, people. I shared the Airbnb with a mule named Dudley. I'm serious. We stayed up all night because we couldn't sleep because I had flies in my eyes. We're just trying to, and he kept kicking me. And he's like, "What do you think of Biden?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't talk about the president. The president is good." And I said, he goes, "I like Newsom, your governor." So I kicked him because he kept kicking me when I. But anyway, I said, "Hey, I don't blame you. Your mother is a donkey. Your father is a horse. That's why you're a mule." Anyway, we had an argument, but no, but truly, I stayed in this beautiful Airbnb, and then we did the show. Well, the next morning, the people that own that ranch that I stayed in, they're horse trainers. So she said to me, she said, Nazareth, would you like to ride the winner of the fastest horse in America in the cowboy races and what do you call it, the barrel racing, the fastest horse in America. This horse. I'm like, I don't ride horses, but what if he runs? She goes, don't worry, he's very smart and he will listen. So I rode this horse and just took the picture like everybody else now. As long as you have a post on social media, you've done it. So I did the thing. My daughter's a equestrian, so she wasn't happy with the way I'm riding Western. She's a English. But anyway, so we had a great time on Saturday, guys. Just quick 2 minutes. This is God. You don't believe in miracles. I do. Well, you do. Some of you do. But I'm Southern Baptist, Calvary Chapel. But I believe in miracles. So this is the miracle. When I was on the 700 Club a few weeks ago, last month, um, a pastor of a small church, and I mean small church in Chattanooga, and he said, and you can watch the interview. That He had a TV show. He was interviewed on a TV show and locally, and he said he had to fight with the Lord to say, do I call him? Do I, He said, we don't have any money. We're a small church. This guy is big. What should? So he he calls me and he goes, Nazareth, I don't know. I'm calling out of the blues. I thought I'll get your agent, but I got you. This is what's going on. I said, listen, I'm going to be in Crossville on Friday. I'm going to be in Knoxville on Sunday. So I'll come in on Saturday. I can do Saturday for you if you want to do it. He goes, yeah, we'll promote it. Well, he did. He promoted, he advertised it. Anyway, a family member of mine calls me from Chattanooga, said, "Hey, would you like to come to dinner at our house before the show?" Which something I do not do. To me, a day of the show is a day of the show. I don't. I have a system. When do I eat? When do I nap? When do I iron my shirt? When do I wear it? When do I go to the event? I normally don't. All of a sudden, I said, "Yeah, of course." So I go to their home. They're wonderful, beautiful. The husband's a dentist, and we had a great talk about the Lord. They're not, I don't, they're not, Protestant Christians, they're traditional Christians. We had a nice talk about the Lord. Then they came to the show. I'm like, don't come to the show. This is not my typical. I'll save you for an arena, for a theater. I want you to see me at my best. You never see me at a best. They said, no, we're coming. So they come to the show, they laugh for an hour, and the wife raised her arm to receive Jesus. So I'm like, I knew why I'm here. I knew why this pastor called me. So praise God. Sometimes when the Lord says something and you said yes to it, remember, you go, why did I say yes? Because there's something behind it that the Lord has planned beforehand that we might walk in it. Ephesians 2:10. Anyway, Sunday morning, I was at Patriot Church, the famous uh, Pastor Ken Peters, the guy that the left hates. He's a pastor. He started the Church of Planned Parenthood, and he left Washington State, moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and we had the show. So I did the morning services for them. It's wonderful. I came home, so I'm home. This Friday, I will be in. I'm leaving to Chicago Friday. Saturday, I'm going to be at the Father's house in Freeport, Illinois. And Sunday morning, I'll be teaching there, doing comedy and message. And then Sunday night, I'll be in Danville at Hope Unlimited Church in Danville, Illinois. So that's the plan. And then the week after, 10 days from Houston. Houston, ladies and gentlemen, a time to laugh in Houston. Get your tickets now. Don't wait till the last minute, people. Don't wait. You Christians, me Christian, you Christians, you wait till the last second to do that. You wait till the last second to buy your tickets. Don't do that. Get your tickets now. Go to my website, Nazareth USA. If you're in Houston, Friday night, October 13th. If you're in Tyler, Texas, Saturday, October 14th. Please do me a favor. If you know anybody in Texas, in Houston, or Tyler, or around that needs laughter and encouragement and the good news, Jesus, please let them go there and get their tickets today. Enough, 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 because I have this wonderful guy from New York that's been waiting, and I don't want to do any more. So let me introduce him. Billy Hallowell. I've been following for a while, and I'm very intrigued by the way he brings the news. No fluff in this guy. Boom. He gives you the news that you really need to hear. He's a journalist, commentator, and digital TV host who has covered thousands of the biggest faith and culture stories. He's written more than 14,000 stories on faith, culture, and politics, has interviewed hundreds of celebrities, authors, and influencers, and is the author of 4 books: Playing with Fire, a modern investigation into demons, exorcism, and ghosts. Boom, I like that. To know about that. The Armageddon Code, one journalist's quest for end times answers. Fault Line, how a seismic shift in culture is threatening free speech and shaping the next generation. Wow, I love that. We'll talk about that. And Left Standing, the miraculous story of how Mason Wells' faith survived the Boston, Paris, and Brussels terror attacks. Halwell has worked in the media for more than 2 decades. He's currently a journalist and host with CBN News and FaithWire, and was formerly director of content and communication at PureFlex, and the former faith and culture editor at The Blaze. So, enough of that. He has contributed to FoxNews.com, The Washington Post. This guy has a huge, the New York Post, the Christian Post, Human Events, the Daily Caller. So, all this, the Huffington Post, among other news sites. Anyway, he is amazing. He has a huge, huge list because 20 years of fruitful work. And I just want to say at the end, Billy Hallowell was educated at the College of Mount St. Vincent in Riverdale, New York. He's in New York right now. Graduated with a B in communication with concentration in broadcasting, corporate, and journalism, and a minor in writing. All right. And he is with us today. So please welcome my friend, Billy Hallowell. Hey, I'm so.
Hey, I have to tell you, that was great hearing you share that. But your story, the places you get to hang out, it's exciting.
Well, thank you. You do it's different. I go to these places, I go perform. You go and find a story or follow a story. And then how fast can you get a news? Let's say something happens in Florida, for example. You fly to Florida or you go to Florida, you get the news, and you have to do it quickly and make sure it's legit. That it means it's not just any information. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a mixture of ways, right? So we actually don't always run out. A lot of times you're making phone calls, you're trying to verify things. Sometimes you have stories that are so big that everyone else has already done the work. They've already verified it, so you kind of dig into that. And you know how it is. You have to be careful with the media. Whatever media you're looking at, what slant does it come from? How are they presenting it? Especially in the faith world, making sure that we tell the story the right way. And so a lot of the time is more spent there. Did the Associated Press miss the faith angle on this story? Did they miss the important thing? And a lot of times you'll be reading the story and 5 paragraphs down, you're like, wait, that's the story. That's the quote about God or the thing that, was missed. So, there are times that we will go. But it's funny because of COVID and even before COVID, but because of what happened with COVID, a lot of our interviews and conversations are like what we're doing right now. And so some days I'll do 3, 4 video interviews, with different people. And that is how we end up collecting a lot of the information now, which is amazing because you can do a story. I mean, back in the day when I worked at the Blaze, there were days where we would do 8 or 9 stories a day. I mean, we just didn't sleep.
Wow. And is there's like a limit? They said, okay, you have to write that many words, or that has to be that many minutes of interviews and stuff to be able
Not
to do it.
Not what I love about CBN is, at Christian Broadcasting Network, we tell the story the way it needs to be told. And so if that means that it's a 5-minute conversation, a 10-minute, a 15-minute, whatever it needs to be to get the story is what we do. And so that's what I love about working in, Christian media, is that the mission is what really matters. And for me, that's an important thing, right? It's not about making a name for yourself. It's about telling the stories that need to be told. So you get to kind of do that, however, whether it's podcast or video. And so every day looks a little different.
Now, can you tell from your experience as a journalist if someone's lying to you?
It's funny you asked that. When I say skeptic, I'm a Christian, so I'm not a skeptic when it comes to God, but I'm naturally, when people tell me something, the first thing I think is, okay, prove it to me. I want to know that you're telling me the truth. And so I try to look for holes in stories. And maybe that's a bad quality. I don't know. But for me, I want to know. And sometimes you can't. If somebody's telling me they had a near-death experience, right, I can only listen to what their story is and report what they're saying. But oftentimes, and you'll find this, and this is what frustrates people so much about the media today, especially, liberal media bias or these things that people talk about, is that it's not the full story. You're not getting the
Right.
full story. You have to read. I mean, I'm sure people listening and watching, they can relate to this. Sometimes you got to read 5 stories to figure out what actually happened. It shouldn't be that way, right? But so yes, I am pretty good at telling when somebody's lying or if they're holding something back. And even if I can't tell, I try to think, okay, what's missing from what they're telling me or from the story? And oftentimes, 90% of the times there is something that's missing.
Now, when you work with, let's say you are working in a non-Christian, network, and you have to write something, and maybe it's inconsistent with your belief system. Is this something you have the option to say, no, I don't want to cover this, I don't want to do that, or?
Yeah, I wouldn't do it. I mean, I will tell you that you can get a lot of pressure. Even a couple of years ago, I mean, I've been doing this since I was 15 years old. I just turned 40. Okay, so I started really young, and that's a whole other story. But there was a prominent outlet. I won't say which one. I agreed to do an opinion piece for them because I do a lot of journalism and I do a lot of opinion pieces, which I do both. And I wrote something. It was about a sensitive topic. It was about the transgender debate, and it was written the way I wanted to write it, and they wanted to reframe it and make it something that I did not want it to be.
Mm.
And they threatened to never allow me to write for them again if I wouldn't allow them to write their version of it. And I said, well, then I won't write for you again. That if God doesn't want me to do it, I won't do it. And if it's going to be hurtful or it's going to do something, and when I say hurtful, if it's going to not send the message that I want to send, I'm not going to do that. So it gets complicated, but not at CBN, not at Washington Times, where I also write. They're great, and they respect what you believe, right?
Is Washington Times a Christian?
No, it's not a Christian outlet. But what's interesting, Higher Ground is a platform that they're building to cover faith, and so they're covering a lot of faith content right now. And I'm working with them on there as well. I'm telling faith stories. Lee Strobel's coming out. So we're bringing kind of people in, and it's been a lot of fun. But they're not, and that's an example. And by the way, props to them, because a lot of these media outlets and people watching or listening know this, that cover faith, or that used to cover faith, even the conservative ones, they've pulled back from it. It used to be a major area of focus. And the audience wants faith content. There's so many people that want it, so many Christians out there. So I admire the outlets, even the secular ones, that are trying to tell those stories the right way.
Why do you think that is? Why are they coming back to that faith stories?
I think there's a big gaping sort of hole, right? Because it's like, and as Christians, this is what I love about CBN. It's like CBN's coming from a Christian perspective. I think
Right.
it gets what happens when a progressive outlet, or when liberals or secularists, that's a better word, are
Yes.
trying to write about faith. They don't understand it. And so you get all these weird stories that don't make sense because they don't know any Christians. They don't understand this culture. And so I think in the conservative world, even though they may not be Christians, they've been around enough Christians to understand it, or they know they need to go to a Christian to get the story. And so I think there was an abandonment of it, and I don't know what caused that. I think maybe politics. Look, since 2016, politics has been so big, right? It's been so prevalent that I
Right.
think maybe some of the outlets diverted attention to that, but they're coming back to it because I think the world's a disaster. You know, the culture, not to go on a TED talk here, but the culture is so crazy that it's been selling this lie. You can believe whatever you want, think whatever you want, and if you don't justify it, you'll be canceled. It's crazy. I think people are realizing that's not working,
Right.
that you're not the God of the self. And so it's, I think, pointing people back to the need for faith. And I think we're seeing that more and more.
What do you do? Like, I remember during COVID and maybe a little before, you watch CNN, and I'll say it, I'll publicly say it, CNN, and the guy is lying to his teeth. He is just lying to his teeth. And what do you say? I'm like, I think how when you go to court, you have to have a Bible and said, you have the right to, I promise to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. It was one of those, like, this guy really, really, he's lying. He's not. That's not what happened. And this just continued to go. So was there any, like, as a journalist, didn't you have to take an oath like a physician to really, or there's no
You know,
accountability for that?
There should be, but there's not. I mean, you know what it is? You go to journalism school, and I think the biggest lie that journalism schools tell, and this is actually a big problem. I don't know if you want to go here, but we'll go. We might as well go here since we're talking about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
The lie, I think, is that you train all these young people to be journalists, and it really is. It's supposed to be an amazing profession where the truth is told, but you get all these young progressives in a room. They live in big cities where, again, they don't know a lot of Christians. They're not that Christians aren't in big cities, but they're not around a lot of them. Their
Right.
world is a progressive liberal worldview, secular worldview. And they've been told the entire time in college, in journalism school, that they don't have any opinions. They're middle of the road. And so you have all these progressives who have been trained to be people who don't have opinions when really they do. Everybody has opinions, and it shapes
Right.
everything. And it's actually this unconscious. I think we talk a lot about bias as though it's conscious, and sometimes it is, right? People are lying through their teeth, but a lot of times it's a bunch of liberal journalists who think that they're actually middle of the road, and they're reporting as though they're middle of the road when they're really MSNBC, and they don't realize it. And I think that is really, really been very dangerous to journalism in this country. And it's why we have so many alternative outlets now, to be
Yeah.
honest.
You know what? You're right, Billy, because when I lived overseas, I lived in the Middle East for the first 19 years of my life. And you hear the news. Every newspaper had different news and different articles, except the major ones. You know what? And you come to this country, and every newspaper or every network have the same five news. It's like someone's telling them, this is all you can report on, and this is what you do. It's just, why is that? Why is this like limited? I mean, now that, like you said, there's new outlets, but why is that? Are they controlled to a degree?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of it is that everybody reads one another, right? So like the New York Times, for whatever reason, the historic nature of the New York Times, right? It's a more liberal outlet, but it's well respected, by other journalists. So all these local outlets, all these people around the country and around the world are reading this outlet, and they're all reading each other. It's like a rubber band ball. They're all just sort of in the
Mm.
same aura of stories. This past week, I was really frustrated watching the fact that in Nagorno-Karabakh, a place most people probably have never heard of, right? In the middle of Azerbaijan and Armenia, you have
Yes.
120,000 mostly Christians who have fled for their lives because Azerbaijan invaded and took the land over. And nobody's talking, very few people are talking about this because the outlets are, I mean, some are covering it. It's not like nobody's covering it, but it's not getting the coverage it deserves. Taylor Swift at an NFL game is what people are talking about. I mean, that is a problem. And so I think it's because they read one another, and I'm guilty of it too at moments. So I have to stretch beyond. I have a whole list of outlets that I have in an RSS feed that I go through every day to make sure that I'm not just reading the same 5 to 10 things.
So what would Billy listen if he wants to know the true story, let's say politics wise, for example? Where do you go personally?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. I will always start with CBN, Christian Post. I'll start with the Christian outlets and I work my way out from there because some stories aren't being covered, right? For different reasons. I will look at 5 or 6 outlets to try to understand the story. And that's the sad thing I was talking about. I don't really think there is a place. Yeah, you can go to the Associated Press, but there's a lens through which it's being presented, and you have to again ask what's missing from this story. And so, I will go all over the place. I'll go to Google News and I'll type in the term, whatever the story is, Trump indictment, whatever it is, and I'm trying to read through it. And again, well, what's missing here? What's going on that I'm not seeing? And that's a disservice. I mean, that's when the media truly are doing a disservice by not. And I'll say one more thing about this. It actually is dangerous because the media have so eroded their credibility that when something really big happens and people actually need to trust the media because they need to understand it, nobody trusts them anymore.
Yes, like the story of the wolf. Is it the wolf is coming and it's fake, and then when he really gets there, no one believes it. But
Yeah.
what is, I want to know, what do you, okay, let's say you're not a journalist. Okay, Billy was fired from every newspaper for being, now he wants to know the true story, what's going on politically or what's going in the country. You said you go to CBN, right? What else? What else do you go read so we can read as listeners, because
Yeah.
we have 123 right now live with us, and there's a lot gonna hear this on on audio next week.
Yeah.
Where should we go to get the true story, honest story, reliable story?
Yeah, I think, and this is probably going to make people squirm because I think CNN has gone down the wrong track. But I will take CNN, Fox News. I will pull USA. I'll go to USA Today, and then I'll pull in some of the outlets that I know, like Christian Post and CBN. And I'll do that because CNN's always going to have 12 things that they're mad at Trump about, whatever the day
Yeah,
is. He's gonna
yeah.
like they're going to be upset about something. Like Trump looked at somebody the wrong way. And so, but you get a sense of, okay, what are they talking about? I do think one thing that is also not great is that we're all really siloed. So I'll go over to a relative who's super progressive, right? And we don't agree on anything. And that relative will have a totally different view on everything that's going on because they've only watched MSNBC and Rachel Maddow. And I'm sitting there thinking, what in the world are you talking about? None of these things are the full story. So I have to go to Fox, CNN. I'll go over to USA Today. I'll look at Washington Post even,
Mhm.
and then I'll look at Daily Wire, right? And those are just some of the ones that I will go to. And again, it's like parallel universes when you read these stories because they're all coming through a lens and they're all leaving something out. Not always, but or there at least there's a tone right to it. So I can't even say there's one that I would go to on its own and really trust it.
So like we have to make up our own decision based on like two polar opposites and go, okay, that's the real story. Now, what would be your favorite? Like, you pray, Lord, let them send me on this. Let me cover this news, or let me write an opinion on this. What is your favorite thing to talk about, to write about?
Oh, You're trying to stump me now. It's really interesting. I am one of those people. I like kind of like you with this show, right? You have different people and you talk about different things. And there are days where I'm starting the day with an interview with the Robertson family from Duck Dynasty, and
Yeah.
then I'm doing an interview with somebody from Alliance Defending Freedom about a teacher who's suing to stop some gender madness in her school. And I love all of it. It's really hard for me to kind of pick one thing because the variety actually I find really interesting, right? And so, I mean, I love my favorite thing to be able to do, even though I do love all of it, is to actually just tell somebody's conversion story. Like I just had Julie Chen Moonves, who's the host of Big
Oh
Brother.
yeah, Big
Yeah,
Brother. Yeah.
yeah. No, I had no idea. Obviously, she's been in the headlines over the last couple of years, her husband and all this other stuff. But she became a Christian in 2018 in the middle of all that. And getting to sit down and talk with somebody about how they went from where they were to finding Jesus and how that's changed their life. I mean, I don't care if they're a celebrity or not. Those are the best stories. I love getting to go in person and tell them, and doing it virtually. That's really what it's all about. At the end of the day, we can fight about Biden and Trump and all the weird things happening in public schools, all these things. But what really, really matters is how Jesus is changing people's lives right now. And so, anyway, that's a long-winded answer, but I think that to me
No,
is the
no.
most important.
That's great. That's great. In fact, today I reached out to Shina Phillips, which she's married to the Baldwin brothers. And because she's a believer, I worked with her many, many years ago, at a gala. She sang, I did the comedy, and I was just trying to see if I can bring her and have her talk about her experience. But when what story really in those 20 years stuck in your head that you said, man, I can't forget that story. That's really stuck to my head. Is there a story you can think of?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a lot of them, but as you were asking that question, the one that came to mind was, and I won't share the names because I mostly can't remember them right now, but the details I remember, the Texas shooting at the church that happened a few years back.
Oh yes, I remember that.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I really hate the most is when somebody's suffering and you're calling them to get a comment from them, and that's something that I don't do it a lot, but it does happen, right? If you can track somebody down and, it feels awful because here you've lost your relatives in a mass shooting and somebody's calling you to write a story, right?
Right.
But I reached out. Something just told me to reach out to this family. There was an elderly couple. They were grandparents, and they had lost, I forget that, I think it was 6 family members in this shooting. And
Mm,
when I reached them, I felt so uncomfortable in light of knowing that fact, that they had lost these family members, and there were so many of them. And it was the most amazing conversation. It was all about God and how they were in heaven and how at peace they were. And it just stuck with me because I thought, these are real Christians. I mean, these are people who are obviously suffering, they're in pain, but they were able to point other people in the middle of that pain toward Jesus, and to do it in such an authentic, beautiful way, really honoring what we know on paper we should say if our family members are killed, but that we know we might not be able to say. They were able to do it. And I wish I could do it justice, but it really did stick with me.
right. What is something you don't like about yourself that I would like to change that? That's something, if I can only change this thing, what would
Mhm.
that be?
Yeah, I love to take on a lot in my schedule, and and
Uh-huh.
I will be so stressed out because I took on so many things, and I'm like, it's fine, I could do it, and I make it happen, but the whole time I'm like, why didn't I just schedule 2 fewer interviews today so that I could, breathe? And so I think that is something, and it's just the motivation of, I love to tell stories. So if somebody's like, we're going to book a time in I got that Calendly app thinking this will be great. People will schedule in my calendar and it'll be organized, but I overschedule that too. So that's something which I know is kind of a weird one, but I would love to change, but I mean, I'm 40 and I haven't changed it. So I don't know. I don't
Oh
think it
no,
will.
you still have a lot of time to change. But let me ask you this: as far as like you wrote several books, and those, I'm sure, when you did these books, you did your research. and one of the books is called uh, "Playing with Fire: A Modern Investigation into Demons, Exorcism, and Ghosts." What was that like, writing this book and doing through that research?
Yeah, well, I did not want to write the book. I'll tell you that much. I did not want to do it. I kept encountering these stories, that people were coming to me. There were actually some films, The Conjuring, these movies that came out. I'm not recommending The Conjuring. I'm just mentioning it because it was allegedly based on a real story. And as a Christian, we know these things happen, right? Not that
Right.
everybody claiming it is true, but they happen, and they happen throughout scripture. And Jesus spent a fair amount of his time, at least recorded time, probably much more time that isn't recorded, expelling demons from people, right? I mean,
Right.
and very dramatic stories, and really actually some beautiful stories of restoration came out of that. And so that book, I actually rejected it the first time there was a book offer to do it, because I did not feel right about it. And I'll be honest with you, I was scared because I didn't understand that Christians have authority over these things. We don't have to be worried about it. We don't need to live in fear. But I was living in fear and thinking, I don't want to touch that. Like, I've been a Christian my whole life, but I don't want to. And I think a lot of people think that way. But long story short, God was basically like, you're going to do this. And I got an offer to write it again, even though I didn't really fill out any kind of proposal. It was just bizarre. It was like dropped in my lap. And I did it, and it was the most peaceful project ever, which sounds crazy probably because I was researching like possession and infestation. And that word ghosts, by the way, I don't believe people die and remain behind as ghosts. I think the spirit realm are angels and demons, and that's what we're dealing with. But it was a pretty incredible process to just look at what Christians believe about evil and what scripture actually says about it, and then look at some of the stories that I can't tell you what to think about, but I can present the evidence to you and let you decide what you believe is true.
Now, for a book like that, how many interviews, research, time it took you to get it ready and draft, and then second draft, and then send it to the publisher?
Yeah, it took months. I mean, I probably talked with about 20 to 30 people in depth, and that was a mixture of theologians, pastors. Look, you can't talk about exorcism without talking to a couple of priests, right? And
Yeah.
even I'm not Catholic, I'm an evangelical. I don't agree with some of their theology, but it was interesting just kind of going through how is Christianity dealing with this. And so it took a lot of time to refine that, and then to get the stories organized in a way that made sense. And so it probably took about a year all in all. And then that book came out in 2020, and I have been talking about that book for 3 years. It's really interesting because people always want to talk about it. They're really, and this is what I found about this topic, and we know this based on Hollywood, right? They're constantly churning out movies, and they're not doing it theologically accurately, but about the demonic, about ghosts and all this other stuff, because it's a common human experience, right? People are interested in it. And so being able to divert people towards the gospel and the truth was really rewarding, and has been.
Right. I had one person this week where I felt, I mean, he was literally, I thought, I mean, if he's not demonic, I don't know what else. It just, he wasn't at the show, but just came and just said whispered couple of words. I just felt, I'm like, I rebuke you, Satan, right now. I've never done that. I mean, it's not like I run into those people, but it was one time, and it just really. I have a question from Sarah, one of our wonderful fans. As a journalist, what do you or did you think of Carrie Lake running for governor in Arizona?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think the thing that I found fascinating about Carrie Lake is that, a journalist, an anchor like that, right, who spent so much time in front of a camera, she knew how to message, right? She knew, and it's just interesting to watch somebody like that. I tend to watch even closer though, because if I know somebody's really good at communicating, I want to know like what's going on behind that communication, right? Like, and it doesn't matter what party they're in. If you're like, Obama was a really good speaker, but that didn't mean anything to me because I didn't agree with anything he was saying. So I would always look behind it to say, well, what, this is personally speaking. So I
Mm.
think I find it interesting. I do think you're going to see more people like Carrie Lake who are journalists, who are teachers, who, come from a more maybe conservative bent, that are sort of tired of the way things are going, and they're going to jump into races like that. So I think it's gonna be fun to kind of watch the different kind of candidates we get. We already see it with school boards, right? All these soccer moms, jumping on the school boards around the country.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. Okay, let me ask you this. You're a great storyteller and you love story. What advice can you give someone who wants to share stories or write stories from your experience? What would be a good advice?
Yeah, I think, it's really easy to just kind of want to throw things at the wall and make them, hope that something sticks. I think we really have to think about how Jesus told stories and examine that and look at that. And I'm by no means comparing. I mean, I am
No, I
nowhere
know.
near as good a storyteller as Jesus. But I think, the way we draw people into a story really matters, right? And how are we hooking them in? What is the purpose of our story? I think a lot of times we tell stories and we don't really know what the purpose is. And so once you have that purpose down, and I think that should be the first thing with any good story is like, what's the reason for this story? And if you look around, one of the reasons that we are in the mess that we are in this culture in this country is a
Mhm.
lot of people in Hollywood and the media are really good at telling stories too, and they're really good at knowing what their purpose is, and that purpose is really counter what the gospel message is, right? And so they've done
Mhm.
a really good job of telling those stories, and so we need to do a really good job of telling stories as well with that purpose. Does that make sense? That purpose
Yes.
really,
Oh
really
yeah.
core to it.
Now, how do you cut the words and take the fluff out? Because this is your style is really good with that. How do you do that? How do you go, well, this is, I can say this without writing all this?
Yeah, I don't always strike it perfect. I'll tell you, there are things I go back and read, and I was like, "What was I?" When you know how it is. You're like writing something. This probably happens to you too. Like, this is brilliant, and then like 10 minutes later, you reread it, and you're like, "Huh?" And I think so. I like to reread things a lot, and then we have an editor who will go through. We kind of edit each other's work. We go through and we read it, and we tweak and make. It's really good to let other people help you because sometimes you're so stuck in your head when you're storytelling or when you're writing that you miss something, right? And
Mm,
so, but yeah, for my own stuff, I will read it two, three, four times if it's really complicated, even more to think, what am I missing? Is there some other detail? Even like we did a explainer recently on Satanism, which I know is an interesting one. But I was kind of troubled by the fact that we're talking about the Satanic Temple and all these groups that are out there doing like after school clubs and stuff. And a lot of people don't realize these groups are actually atheist groups that don't even believe that Satan exists, right? So, and helping people understand though those sorts of things. And I'll spend a lot of time reading that over to make sure we have it all. Random mention, but that was one that comes to mind that we had to do that for.
How do you balance your time with your wife with when you're
Mm,
that kind of person that's like always on taking in more than you do, and plus you have two daughters, or
yeah,
how do
11
you
and
do
8.
11 and 8? How do you? That's a big age where they need daddy. How do you handle? How do you balance that?
It's interesting. My wife is a teacher. She's
Oh,
out early in the morning. She heads out and I start around 4:30 in the morning, 5, either trying to do a workout and then working at the same time. I get the kids on the bus. I spend time with them in the morning, do a devotion with them, make sure they've got things figured out. And I do everything from home now. Again, thank you, COVID.
you're right.
Which is actually kind of nice. So my hours are long, but I can when they get off the bus, I could talk with them. I pick up my younger one from the bus. So that's been really amazing because in the past, when I was going into New York City and coming, it would be like 7:30 at night. You're missing everything. And at night, I really try to carve out time, before they go to bed. And then weekends, I really pull back. I used to do like when I was writing books, I'd write all weekend long. And it's just not healthy. You have to make that time.
Right.
That what's most important is not going to be how many articles or books, I've written. It's going to be pouring into my family. So I'm not perfect at it, but I do try to be much better than I used to be about it.
So, what attracted you to journalism? I mean, what was it? Was that when you were little? You're like, I want to be a journalist.
Yeah, I'm not joking. From the minute I can remember, I was really interested in Hollywood and media. Those were the
Mm,
2 things. And I thought for a while, like, I want to tell stories and be an actor, yeah, like that didn't pan out. And it wasn't what God wanted, but it was the storytelling though that attracted me to it that I see now. It's like, I've gotten to do some fun little roles here or there and fun little movies and stuff. But from the moment I can remember, I wanted to write, I wanted to tell stories. I was creating newspapers, and I think God just puts these things in us, right? I
right.
was creating a newspaper in like 3rd grade with friends, trying to like tape it together at school. And so it was always a thread for me throughout. And by the time I was 15, I actually, God kind of put me on this path to be able to do that. And I was writing as a teenager, I'm sure not that well, but I was doing it. And, just from there, it kind of took off.
Now, what was your biggest break when from the age 15 till now? What was the biggest break that you got to do what you love to do?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because there were really a series of them. I think when I was 15, what got me really started in media for real, was that the Columbine shooting happened. I was a freshman in high
Oh yeah.
school, and I lived in New York. I was nowhere near, but it just affected me. I remember thinking, I was homesick the day that the shooting happened, and I was watching the news with my dad, and I remember thinking, if that could happen there, that could happen anywhere. And of course, you're naive and you're thinking, I'm going to get involved and stop this from ever happening again. Obviously, we've seen this tragically happen again and again and again because of sin and evil and all of that. I didn't fully understand that then. And I thought, if I could just get involved and create a TV show for teenagers, right? I was already thinking about these things, then.
Wow.
And, I tried to create a TV show, couldn't raise the money for it. But started meeting with producers and other people who kind of poured into me and said, well, why don't you start a website? And so I started a website for teenagers when I was 15. And that was kind of the first thing that started me on that path. And then I was offered a column when I was 18, and I would write a weekly column. And the big thing was, once I got through journalism school, was going down to Fox News. And, I was traveling around speaking, by the way, at schools around the country. And then, going to Fox News, doing media hits. And then my big sort of break was The Blaze. I was the faith editor at The Blaze for about 6 years with Glenn Beck. And
Yeah.
that was really, and I love Glenn for giving us all that
What
platform.
happened to him? Where is he now?
So he's still at The Blaze. They're still around doing their thing. And it's a very different place now. You've got the Robertsons have their show from Duck Dynasty over there. They've got a podcast. So it's a lot different from when I was there. I left there in 2016, but that time there really opened up so many doors and friendships that I still have. And, that showed me, to be honest, I want to cover faith. I had a chance to do that there, and it really set me on that path.
Now, where were you born? I mean, where did you grow up? Where? In New York?
Yeah, Rochester, New York, which I don't know. I mean, you've been all over the place. Maybe you've been there, but
Oh
it's
yeah, I've been.
upstate New York. It's funny because I'm near New York City now, and so I call this crazy land, because up there is like it's just diverse ideologically, and down here it's not, which is kind of funny. Nobody agrees with me about anything, which I actually don't mind. It
Right.
doesn't really bother me, but I grew up there near Niagara Falls, about an hour away from there.
Oh, I love that. Now, Chris Rossetti has a question. Does AI have any place in professional journalism?
Yeah, I think right now people are panicking about AI across the board. Like, how many people, like, are you going to not be a comedian anymore because there's going to be like a robot comedian telling jokes, right? Am I going to lose my job because, Chat GPT is writing articles? I think it remains to be seen. I don't think it has a role in terms of, here's a full article written by this, machine that you should just republish, right? Um, my thought is that this is going to be a tool that might help. Well, before I say that, my biggest concern is this: who owns AI? Who's programming it? Because that is actually, just like media and all the other things we're talking about,
You're right.
who's programming that? If it's truly fair-minded and not being owned by one side or the other, or anti-Christians or whatever, then we could say, okay, this is a tool to use. That's my big concern. Let's say it is fair-minded and it's done in a way that you can at least get an outline for how to write. I think it could be a tool to help speed up some things, to give you some ideas, to help you brainstorm. So I'm cautiously sort of watching it and wondering where it's going to go, but I don't think it has a role or should have a role in replacing journalism and replacing human beings, because it can't think and reason the way a human being can, and it never will be able to. It's not
Right.
alive.
Right. Now, how did you come to know Christ? You talk about, my faith, my faith. When did that start for you?
Yeah, I grew up in the church, right? And I think a lot of people can relate to this. I grew up with head knowledge in the church, meaning I kind of, my parents took me, I knew what it meant. I would say, yes, I'm a Christian. And then I went to college, and that was challenging, and I think college is challenging in general. Parents pay
Right.
tens of thousands of dollars to send their kids to be re-educated basically half the time, out of a Christian worldview. So I didn't lose my faith in college, but I actually think it was sort of broken down, and I had to figure out: is this for me? Is this for my parents? Like, what is this? And I really still though lived very much. This is what I want. This is what I want to do. God, you're there, but like I'm going to do what I want to do, and God's going to co-sign it. And so it really wasn't until I hit about 30, until I got into my 30s, that I started to really understand it isn't about me, it's about him, and everything I do needs to honor him, right? And of course, nobody's perfect at living that out all the
Right.
time, but really, I would say I accepted Christ when I was 6 years old, which I remember the moment. It was authentic and real, but I think it really didn't take the root it needed to take until a little bit later. And I think a lot of people who grow up in the church can relate to that.
Now, how is your writing articles or doing reporting on news change with social media? Is it
Yeah.
or
You know, I would actually say Twitter, like old school Twitter, was one of the best tools for connecting with people. There are a lot of people who I connected with, that even sources and celebrities and people, in the Christian world that I needed to communicate with, it really helped with that. I think the other side of it is that it can become all consuming. For a good chunk of the original years that I spent working at the Blaze, I was obsessed with social media. I was on it all the time, and I've really pulled back from that, and it's been amazing to live normal life and not, but you always feel that pull back, because how do you reach people? You reach people through social media, right? So it's that
right,
challenge, and you can relate to this. Anybody can, of trying to make sure content is out there, and that we use these tools, because these tools are being used for a lot of bad. That as Christians we use them to point people to Christ, and so social media has transformed a lot of the way, even how you tell stories, right? Having to think that through. For
yeah,
instance, YouTube is a great tool, and you want to make sure you're using YouTube to tell stories. So when I to sort of summarize this, when I do an interview, if I'm having you on, let's say, I would do a video interview with you. That video interview would go on YouTube in its entirety. I'd write a story based off of it, and then you'd be on our podcast with the audio from it. And so it's multi-use media, which is actually a cool part of social media.
right. A question from Has Billy watched The Chosen? I love to hear his thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's so funny because we just had Vodi Bakum on, and he is not a Chosen fan, right? And so it was interesting. Everybody has a different viewpoint on The Chosen. What I do love about The Chosen is that it's getting a conversation going. Let's move the debates to the side about the pride flag and all these other things that have gone on around The Chosen. And the fact that you have a show, is it telling you precisely word for word things, everything in it from scripture? No, because they have to create other narratives and storylines around it.
Yeah,
But it is getting people talking. I mean, I've heard from a lot of non-believers who have said, "Hey, I'm watching The Chosen and I'm finding this really compelling." Bringing to life stories. And there's a danger when anybody does this, of making sure people understand that it's not the gospel. You're not watching the gospel, right? You're
right.
watching an iteration of what it might look like. But on the flip side, being able to see those stories that we've all read our entire lives come to life in a totally different way, that is the powerful part, I think, of The Chosen. And it's why The Chosen has resonated the way that it has, right? And so I'm excited to kind of see where it goes. I have not watched, I think I've started season 2, so I'm behind, right? So I'm talking mainly about season 1 right now. And I know season 4 is coming, so I'm really behind. But I have been intrigued to watch it.
I had this argument with my attorney friend who said, Nazareth, the chosen is the only thing right now that is Christian about Jesus is out there that's actually quality and people are watching it. And he goes, you gotta give it that credit. I go, yes, but I've been asked by non-Christians about things that they said this is in the Bible because I saw it in the chosen. I go, no, 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 not everything in the Bible and
And
the
that's a
chosen is
problem.
in the Bible, and that's where my challenge comes in with that show. But as far as like, hey, more power to it. Keep making them. As long as they're hearing about Jesus and wanting to go back to the Word of God, then that's it. Now, during this interview so far, in the last 49 minutes, three times you said that's a great question or that's a good question.
You're a good
Coming from a
interviewer.
journalist like you is amazing. So let me ask you this: what? How can people be better interviewers? What did you learn from your own experience and doing a lot of interviews? What makes a good interviewer?
I think, gosh, and this is something that I have traditionally struggled with. My wife will tell you, but listening, because actually the communication we do more often than any other communication is to listen. It's what we spend most of our time doing, and yet most of us are probably really bad listeners. And so a lot of times we have a list of questions, and I'm guilty of this too, and we're going through them, and our goal is to get through that list of questions when really the subject is saying other things that you need to pivot into. And so my best interviews are the ones when I'm tired, when I'm really tired, I'm going through a list and I'm trying to survive my fifth interview of the day, right? And I don't mean that because I don't want to be doing it. You just get
No.
tired. But when I'm really on my game, I might only read two or three of the questions that I had prepared. I probably have really listened to the point of being able to say, oh, wait, you said this. Tell me about that. I wasn't even
Right.
thinking I was going to ask you that, but tell me. And I think that's what makes really good conversations. You need to have a structure, but being willing to go off of that structure and follow the guest to a point. Some guests are crazy and you got to reel them back in, but
Right.
where they're going with their thoughts.
Right. Was there something, a story, something you covered that it was very funny or embarrassing?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Recently, I gave the same interview link on Zencaster to different interview subjects, and there were tech issues. And the first interview, there's always a half an hour between interviews. And there was a celebrity on this particular interview, which doesn't always happen. And this person, I didn't know them, so I didn't have any kind of relationship with them. Where it's already strange when you don't know somebody and you're kind of coming into it. Long story short, the other interview subject logged in very early to this interview, so we're in the middle of this interview, and this random face pops up right in the discussion, and it just became. And then he sees that this person's a celebrity and starts fanning out over this person in the middle of this interview. And it was the most awkward. And I thought, you got to send different links to people. You should
Yeah.
know this after 20 some odd years. Yeah.
Right. Now, if a young 15-year-old came to you right now, Billy, and said, "Give me some advice on journalism in my generation right now with all these things going on," what would you tell them?
I would actually tell them, obviously, before even getting into the journalism side of things, to make sure that their worldview is established and solid, because worldview is the most important thing right now. And secular people don't always like that word, worldview. They think it's just a Christian word and only Christians have worldviews. But everything that's happening right now in this country, in this world, is the result of worldview. And everybody has one. And either it's a God worldview or it's a not God worldview. And we have to be very clear about where we stand. And I think young people right now, I mean, look, we're seeing amazing things on campuses, baptisms, mass baptisms. But the reality is, young people are the most depressed, disconnected, sad they've ever been. And there is a reason for that. We've deprived them of God and told them to worship themselves, essentially. So I would encourage anybody who wants to get into journalism to really make sure they have their worldview. Go to Summit Ministries, go to one of these places where you can really get good rooting, and then go to journalism school. But make sure that if you go to, and you don't have to go to journalism school, by the way, there are lots of other ways to be a journalist. But if you choose to do that, that you're going in there knowing who you are and whose you are, because that is going to be the key to being successful and not getting sucked into the lies.
But don't you think a journalist shouldn't have his opinion? Just
I do.
cover
Here's
a
what I
story.
think. Here's what I think. I think a
Mhm.
journalist should either not have their opinion in their coverage, or, and the alternative is becoming more appealing because I don't trust anybody in the media, or they're really clear about where they are, where their opinion is, so that what you're engaging in. It's actually, and this is a terrible example, but Bill Maher, who's a comedian, and I don't
Oh
agree
yeah,
with
I
him on
know.
anything, but you know where Bill Maher is coming from. There's no trick or lie, right? And so you're entering into that knowing. The problem with a lot of the media is they're pretending again that they don't have that bent. And
Mm,
that's where it becomes a real problem. So, yes, I think I have to be able to, and I do both. I do commentary and I have to be able to say if this is journalism and I'm moderating a discussion, I'm not going to give my opinion in this context. I know that, and I can do that. I know I've been trained to do it. If I'm writing an opinion piece, I'm fine to write my opinion, but I have to be open about where I am. And so I think that I agree with you, but I also think the alternative of that is just be open and honest about where you are. And we don't have to pretend that that's not happening. And then I might actually trust that. Look, Bernie Sanders is a great example. I think Bernie Sanders is crazy on a whole bunch of topics, right? Right. But Bernie probably was the most honest out of anybody in the election about who he was. I wouldn't vote for him ever. But it was very clear this is what he believes. I don't agree with it. And there's no lying or trickery. This is who he is. And I think it would be better if journalists just did that in some ways.
right. Sarah's asking, let's see, have you ever heard about the Reawaken America tour by Clay Clark? And if so, what's your take on it?
So I've heard of it. I don't know enough about it though to give a take on it. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, Sarah. I
Yeah.
wish I did.
Okay, let me ask you this. You, as a journalist, hear a lot of bad news, a lot of killing, a lot of shooting, a lot of the fighting politically and stuff. What keeps you positive, for a lack of a better word? I know Christian wise, what would you say to people who are like, the news are depressing me. What do I do? How do you encourage these people?
Yeah, I think I was recently talking with a friend who was going through a tough time and they were talking to a counselor, and the counselor told them to actually pull back from watching the media. And I thought it was really interesting. I think that because all this stuff is happening and it's so crazy that there are actually people who are so consumed by watching it that it's actually creating fear in them. And we as Christians, we are not supposed to be letting fear overtake us. We are not supposed to be living in fear. And so if we're finding ourselves in that position all the time, either fearful or just viciously angry about everything. Look, I get really annoyed about some of the things that are happening. I
Right.
think we have to either avoid it sometimes, take little breaks, or intentionally look for, go to Christian Broadcasting Network, go to CBN, go to Christian Post, and look at what's being covered because there's a lot of really good news too. And I think we need to be looking for that intentionally sometimes. And I intentionally cover those stories because I'll tell you, if you put Good Samaritan into Google News, you'll be shocked by how many stories of people trying to save people, rescue them, drag them out of fiery cars. There's so much going on in the midst of this that is good. And in the end, we know who wins. So I think we just need to not live in that fear. And we need to be willing to either take that break or look for those alternative stories.
That's a very good advice. Very good advice. How can people get your books, get a hold of you, read your articles, read your opinion? Can you give us all of that?
Yeah, so I'll give you a bunch of places you can go, but my day-to-day is faithwire.com and cbnnews.com. So that's where my content is every day. And actually every morning, and I would encourage people to do this, 7 a.m., the Quick Start podcast from CBN. That is a
Mhm.
show that I co-host with two others at CBN. And we tell the news through a Christian lens. It's only about 20 minutes. You get the big stories of the day. You get an interview with somebody every day. We have someone different on. We've, have Christian artists on. We have, sometimes it's really hard news interviews. And so Quick Start Podcast, you can find that wherever podcasts are heard. And then if you go to billyhallowell.com, you will find the books and, those are the three places I would say to go. Oh, and my columns at washingtontimes.com every Thursday. So you find that there.
BillyHallwell.com. Okay, here we go. I think I put it out, and that's Billy. It's just been amazing. I would probably spend 2 more hours just asking you questions, and I do like you said. I put a skeleton, but I normally never look because I'm intrigued with what you say. But I appreciate your time. I know you've been it's already probably 10:30 where you're at, and you need to get up at 4:30 tomorrow. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much. If you want to stick around for 2 minutes, let me close the program and just get back to you. So All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. All 124 of you watching live, and all of you who are gonna, listen. Would you please subscribe to the podcast, share this with people, and appreciate the ones that answer, that really ask questions stuff. It just keeps it interactive. But please go to billyhallwell.com, find out all his articles and stuff on CBN and all that. They've had some great Christian artists like Nazareth. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I was just on it. I've been on CBN several times, so this is really good too. But let me say this, please, if you know anybody in the Texas area, in Houston or in Tyler, Texas, next week, the 10th, the 13th of October, and the 14th of October. Let them get their tickets. The Bible says there's a time to weep and a time to laugh. The name of the tour is A Time to Laugh. So we need people to come and laugh and be encouraged, hear the good news of Jesus. So if you know anybody, just tell them, hey, you need to go to Nazareth, USA and get your tickets today. Don't wait till the last day. Also, if you're in the Illinois area, I'm going to be there this Saturday and Sunday morning at the Father's house in Freeport. And also Sunday night, I'm going to be at Hope Unlimited in Danville, Illinois. Okay. Love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please share it with your friends and subscribe. And God bless you. Good night.